Well, this was a much longer break in between videos than I expected. Where have I been? Well, in the last year, I moved into my first apartment, got adjusted to my new living space, and was slowly working on my way through my ongoing projects. And then my poor laptop's hard drive crapped out on me. Lost all that progress, and on top of that, lost 5 completed scripts because I was an idiot and didn't bother saving those scripts to the cloud. That was incredibly demoralizing, but it was also a very important slap upside the head. Lord knows I'm not making another mistake like that again. Update aside, I'm back. And I'm going to kick off my return by finishing up my 4-part retrospective series on the Heavy Iron Studios Spongebob games. And that other thing. This time around, we're going to look at the video game tie-in for the Spongebob Squarepants movie. But first, I know it's been a long while since my first 2 Spongebob videos came out, so for the sake of context, as well as because I'll be drawing a lot of comparisons between the movie game and Battle for Bikini Bottom, I highly recommend rewatching at least my Battle retrospective. But getting to the subject at hand, the Spongebob movie game. The unofficial sequel to BFBB, developed by Heavy Iron Studios. Sounds all nice and dandy. After all, I hardly brung up anything about Battle's development history. It was very cut and dry, no real issues or complications to speak of, especially compared to Revenge of the Flying Dutchman. But this time around, the team had one big problem. After Battle's release on October 31st, 2003, Heavy Iron was approached by Nickelodeon to make a new SpongeBob game based off the upcoming movie. The movie was to premiere on November 14th, 2004, and the game was released a week before. This means that the game had to be made in just about a year, which, even for a licensed game, was going to be a real challenge. Heavy Iron had a decent idea though. Instead of starting from the ground up, they decided to reuse Battle's engine along with a lot of its gameplay ideas and assets to make the new game. That said, the movie game is not a retread of the same material, instead feeling more like a remix of what we had before. The gameplay felt very similar and looked very similar, but we had levels based off locations from the movie, a new linear level-to-level system as opposed to Battle's more open collectathon structure, and we even got full-on levels based off the sliding, as well as brand new driving stages and the paddy wagon. At the time, this game was fairly well received by critics, getting scores that were very close to Battle. But weirdly, most criticism was levied at the game's overall presentation, not the actual gameplay. Play Magazine in particular called this game a AAA platformer, which, again, for a licensed kids game, a statement like that from any gaming publication is a huge compliment. And unsurprisingly, the game sold just as well as Battle, getting all the same Player's Choice labels across all the various consoles. So yeah, very well received for the time, and for the longest time it was widely regarded as another terrific example that licensed games don't always have to suck, though it was never brought up to the same extent as its older brother. However, in recent time, this game has become a lot more divisive among the SpongeBob fanbase. It's safe to say that nobody thinks this game is better than Battle. That part has become common wisdom. What's debated is just how much of a step down this is from Battle. Either you think this game is a pretty good successor to Battle that did creative things with its constraints and is mostly fun, or you think it's a mediocre follow-up that lost a lot of Battle's nice touches and is frequently frustrating to play. Obviously, there are people whose opinion lies outside what I just said, but from what I can tell, most fans are within these two camps. As for me, I might very well be putting a target on myself from the start of this video, because the SpongeBob movie game was the very first game I owned when I got my GameCube for Christmas in 2005, along with Mario Party 7 and Sonic Heroes. And back then, this was easily my favorite of the 3. And for a large portion of my childhood, this was in my top 10 favorite games along with Battle for Bikini Bottom. Back then, I couldn't really tell you which of these games I liked more. I just reasoned that both had their advantages over the other and were enjoyable for different reasons. However, since 2005 I've been exposed to way more 3D platformers, and I've become capable of articulating what works and doesn't work about the games I play. And while BFBB has held strong for me all that time and remains one of my top 5 GOATs, the movie game hasn't held up quite as well for me, and every playthrough only makes its problems more apparent. Still, as a reviewer, I'm committed to giving the movie game an honest and thorough examination. I'm going to bring up the good and the bad wherever I find it. And just in case you think my nostalgia is going to get in the way, I'll remind you that Battle for Bikini Bottom was just as much a childhood favorite for me as the movie game, and if you watch that video, you'll know I had my fair share of criticisms of that game. Trust me, the rose-tinted glasses are coming off, and I'm going to give this game the video it deserves. This is a retrospective of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie game. We start with the story, which shouldn't be too hard to guess if you've seen the movie. In his latest and greatest plan yet, Plankton sets in motion his devilish Plan Z. He steals King Neptune's crown and frames Mr. Krabs for the crime. SpongeBob and Patrick set off on a perilous journey across the ocean to retrieve the crown from Shell City, all the while contending with thugs, monsters, the gargantuan Cyclops, and even a hitman sent after them by Plankton. Very simple plot that worked for the movie and works just as well for this game. What I look forward to from games like this is how the designers incorporate scenes from the movie into levels, as well as what extra stuff they'll throw in for good measure. And I feel this game does that job fairly well. You hit every major beat of SpongeBob and Patrick's journey in this game, starting with a tutorial based off of SpongeBob's dream, followed by Goofy Goobers, the desert, the Thug Tug, the trench, the junk pile, Shell City, David Hasselhoff's Harry Beck, and ending at Planktopolis. That already provides a lot of potential, but Heavy Iron still managed to come up with multiple small deviations and extensions of the movie's plot to add onto the level pile. Instead of hoofing it through the entire desert, the duo uses a bathtub as a makeshift sled partway through. Instead of plummeting to the bottom of the trench, they shellboard their way down to the bottom. This scene in the junkyard, where we immediately run to Dennis, takes its time, with Patrick making his way through, destroying some of Plankton's propaganda-pushing TVs in the meantime. And instead of Hasselhoff shooting our heroes straight to the Krusty Krab 2, we land in the heart of Planktopolis, where SpongeBob has to battle his way through countless traps and buckethead minions. I like this kind of stuff, I really do. More importantly, the game, much like Battle, is still really funny, when it's allowed to be. Yeah, by its very nature as a movie tie-in, this game is missing a chunk of what made Battle so charming. Mainly, the characters. Now, I completely understand the dilemma. The movie's all about SpongeBob and Patrick going on a grand adventure, while all the other characters are back home. It wouldn't make sense if we saw characters like Larry the Lobster at the Thug Tug or in the Trench, but it just means that a lot of those fun character interactions we got in Battle are gone by default. Throughout the entire game, the only NPC you talk to is Mindy via these magical clamshells found at the start of most levels, where she'll give you your objective. Bringing up the downside of this right away, it means that there are no NPCs populating the levels like with Battle. Once Mindy exposits, gives you a new move, and sends you on your merry way, you won't see her again until the next stage. Again, it makes sense, but it greatly decreases the possibilities for dialogue, which I'm not very fond of. But, like I said, while conversations with Mindy are disappointingly infrequent, they're still entertaining. There's plenty of back and forth where Mindy is the straight man to SpongeBob's naivete and Patrick's stupidity, a dynamic I'm completely on board for.
How fast do you two think you can slide?
Does this answer your question?
Okay.
Especially when you consider she didn't interact with them that much in the actual movie. She's encouraging and cheery, but has the perfect reactions to their silliness, and she even throws a bit of sass their way.
Good job getting the crown.
Are you kidding? That was easy.
Yeah, we are the manliest of men.
Then what about the hopelessness?
Hopelessness?
The weeping?
Lady, you must have been watching over someone else.
Never mind.
I especially love when she tells the player character they don't have enough tokens for the new move yet, and then they proceed to bargain with her with flimsy replacements. For as funny as the dialogue is, it only gets better with the in-game cutscenes. There were cutscenes in Battle, but they were restricted to the opening, the boss intros and outros, along with the Planktron debuts. There's way more in-game cutscenes here, and they're put to good use. The enemy introductions are here once more, and the slapstick and timing is once again on point, but a solid portion of the story updating cutscenes are also really fun and have a lot of that chemistry and charm I crave in my SpongeBob games. The funniest part for me was easily in the Thug Tug, where SpongeBob and Patrick are constantly finding and losing the Paddy Wagon's key in increasingly ridiculous ways. After a full tour of the building and brutalizing all the bar's able-bodied patrons, SpongeBob has the key in arm's reach, but Patrick is so paranoid that he just launches himself at it 16 years later, and that's still gonna laugh at me. It's at this point where I bring up the voice acting, and yeah, it's been on Battle's quality standard. Obviously, it was a lot easier to round up the voice actors needed this time around, considering how few speaking roles there are in this game, but hey, that can't be helped. More importantly, we've got a near-perfect attendance of the movie's talents. Tom Kenny, Bill Fagerbakke, and Mr. Lawrence are back once again for this game and putting in their best efforts. Clancy Brown came back to spare us from Bob Joel's Smoker Lung. They somehow got both Scarlett Johansson and Jeffrey Tambor in, which is pretty damn incredible. The only one we didn't get for this game was Alec Baldwin, and honestly, when you listen to Dennis, you can only barely tell it's not him. The man they got for this role was Fred Tasseur, and when you read through his filmography, you can tell he's got a talent for voicing guys who are large and in charge. This is off topic, I realize, but give it a look when you get a chance. It's surprisingly extensive. He's been the voice behind the Hulk in both animation and video games for a decade and a half at this point, and he's got plenty of solid roles sprinkled in, including Bane, Dingodile, Soldier 76, Master Shifu, and Mr. Grouper from Bubble Guppies. Clearly, some of the most badass characters of our time. He was also apparently the Maku from another childhood favorite of mine, Battle for Volcano Island, and that opening line from him in that game still gives me chills.
The Maku. Fools! You cannot stop me! This world is mine!
So, yeah, he was a great choice for Dennis and pulls off a damn fine impression.
Who are you?
Your worst nightmare.
A big pile of broccoli?
Name's Dennis. I was hired to kill you.
Honestly, I'd say the increased amount of in-game cutscenes would probably balance out the lack of NPC dialogue. The key word here, however, is would. See, about half the game's story is told in-game, while the other half is told in these storyboard slideshows with the French narrator explaining what's happening. And these, I don't get these. Why are these here? They're not funny. They aren't even real movie snapshots at times, where sometimes we're getting what looks like concept art, and other times we'll get amateurish Photoshop jobs, where SpongeBob and company will have stock posing you see in all sorts of SpongeBob merchandising. Maybe there wasn't enough time or budget to make cutscenes for the whole game, but if that's the case, why not ask Nickelodeon for clips from the actual movie? It was common practice in the late 90s and early 2000s for licensed games to include scenes from the movie, partially because it made telling the story easier, but also because it would theoretically make kids more eager to watch the movie this stuff came from, especially when the game was released before the movie came out in theaters. I can't imagine Nickelodeon would say no to that. As is, these just come off as a waste of time. Overall, the story is a pretty solid adaptation of the movie story. The good points of Battle Story have mostly carried over here, and some aspects do see expansion that I'm sure SpongeBob fans will appreciate. That said, its inconsistent presentation is very distracting, and this Windows Movie Maker's method of storytelling offers nothing beyond the most basic of exposition. It's far from game ruining, but if we were to get another THQ Nordic remake for this game, I think we can all agree these need to be thrown out and replaced with more in-engine cutscenes. If you recall my battle video, you'll remember I praised that game's visuals. While about average on the technical side, it overcame that by weaponizing the show's appealing art style, character design, and color palette, making for a game that is still pleasant in the eyes nowadays. Utilizing the same engine, the movie game is about in the same boat, but not without its own talking points. I'll just get my main complaint out there right away. The levels in this game aren't nearly as fun to look at as the ones in Battle. Another downside of its connection to the source material, this game uses all those locations from the movie. And while the movie's superb 2D animation allowed every area to pop, I can't say the same about this game. Most locations just look generic, with bleak color choices and the lack of anything truly SpongeBob-y about them. That's not to say some levels don't look good, mainly Bikini Bottom and the Goofy Goober areas, but these are the exceptions and not the rule. The desert levels look like every other desert level, the junkyard is just a bleak amalgamation of trash, which admittedly has some creativity in how the platforms are made from various bits of rubbish, and the Thug Tug just looks boring, with nothing that really stands out. It gets to a point where if SpongeBob or Patrick wasn't on screen, the average person would likely have no idea this was meant to be a level in a SpongeBob game, something that you could not say about most of the levels in Battle. That said, while the environmental design has taken a sizable step back, all the other elements remain pretty strong, and even bring forth some positive additions. I always love the Planetrons for their distinct, goofy designs, but the bucketed minions take it a step further by giving us enemies whose appearances change based on the area. I always love when games do this. I understand that the average 3D platformer isn't going to have the same extensive enemy roster as a 3D Mario game, but some aesthetic differences can go a long way in distracting from a shallow enemy pool. For example, foggers go from health code violating employees, to inbred country bumpkins, to beer breath bikers, to one-eyed cretins. And that's just one example of all the creative details that were poured into this game. As the paddy wagon takes damage, it'll look more and more destroyed, almost as if a huge bite has been taken out of it. Character unlocks and upgrades will show little 2D drawings of the character using their new ability. Simply unlocking it will show the hero all content and happy, and it's adorable. While the upgrades show them super pissed off, and it's always worth a chuckle. No one can withstand the wrath of the Rage Cartwheel. My favorite new touch are the level-specific costumes and animations for SpongeBob and Patrick. They're not in every level, but they add an extra layer of charm whenever they're used. Watching manly men confidently stroll through the trench and junkyard, witnessing drunken cartoon characters fumble around goofy goobers, and the Thug Tug version where Patrick is a nervous wreck and SpongeBob trades in his bouncy run for the greatest movement animation since Lanky Kong's Tiptoe.
Hey, Plankton, can our first song go like this?
That said, for as much attention to detail as there is for the majority of the game, there are a few tiny hiccups that I've noticed from all of my time playing. The first being with these combat challenges. These missions have you going up against waves of enemies. A fine idea. Logically, you'd expect the enemies to have the same appearance as the stage the challenge is found in. Instead, the game opts for putting in enemies from stages you would find later in the game. The Thug Tugs combat challenge will have enemies themed after the Trench. The one in the Trench has Planktopolis branded baddies, which even spoil the Merv enemy you're properly introduced to in the next level. And the one in Goofy Goobers actually gets it half right with the Slammers, but then has the country foggers found in the deserts, so that one isn't even consistent. It's just a weird decision. The second being with this turret guy. When you're first introduced to him in the Thug Tug, he's a small thug fish hiding in a crude metal barrel. I like him. He fits in well with the other enemies in the area. But for some reason they reuse this enemy type in both the Trench and Planktopolis, but he still looks the same. Considering how good the game is with adapting enemy appearances to stages otherwise, this enemy type staying the same just breaks my immersion. Like seriously, what are unaligned thugs doing hanging out in a monster-infested trench in a fascist regime? Concept art in the game's extra section shows that other versions of Turret were on the table, so maybe they ran out of time to create new models for him, but if that's the case, why not just replace the ones past the Thug Tug with Poppers, since they're so mechanically similar? I know these are textbook nitpicks, but I'm just trying to be thorough. You can only examine inconsistencies like these for so long before they start to bug you. I could also get into the GameCube version's technical weaknesses in comparison to the PS2 and Xbox versions, like the lower res textures, the lower frame rate in some sections, and outright missing lighting effects. And while I do wish the GameCube version fared better in that regard, especially since it's usually the PS2 that delivered the worst graphics and performance for multi-platform games, I can't say it's so much worse that it actively discourages me from the GameCube version. Overall, the movie game is still a nice looking game even now, and while I do prefer Battle's visuals for its more vibrant color palette alone, I can't say this game does a poor job at representing the movie, and it still has a lot of that heavy iron polish that I'm quite fond of. Moving on, we can talk about the soundtrack. The only area where I can confidently say the movie game proudly carries Battle's torch without any big slip-ups. If Battle did an outstanding job at creating music that could fit the show perfectly, the movie game does the same thing for the movie. It feels like the OST was split right down the middle, with one half embracing the more lighthearted, optimistic tone that's a natural fit for a cartoon road trip, while the other half goes for atmosphere and raw intensity befitting the movie's more extreme, threatening set pieces. To prove my point, I picked out a couple tracks for each side, those being the themes for I'm Ready Depression, Sandwich Driving 101, Bubble Blowing Baby Hunt, and the Frogfish Boss. I'm Ready Depression's track can best be described as a drunken makeout session between an underpaid children's performer and a grand piano, and it's kind of the greatest thing ever. Between the somewhat off piano playing, the random sound effects cutting in, and this chorus of what sounds like dry heaving, and this is one of the only video game level tracks I would describe as actively funny to listen to. Not to mention it's a perfect match while Spongebob and Patrick try to find their bearings after an ice cream hangover. Sandwich Driving 101 is a rural-style traveling song that incorporates guitar, banjo, fiddles, ukulele, accordion, the piano, and some kind of percussion that sounds like someone's playing the spoons, and the result is simply wonderful. I just get really happy listening to this, and I could totally see myself playing this on a real road trip. On the other side, we've got Bubble Blowing Baby Hunt. How would you establish the roughest, meanest biker bar in the 7 Seas? How about a mixture of electric guitar and drums played at a slow, steady rate, encapsulating the feeling of walking into an intimidating area? I also love how a minute in you hear a ukulele play backup for the guitar, but it's still very much in the background, much like how SpongeBob and Patrick are trying to get through this tugboat as unnoticeable as possible. That's a great touch. As for the Frogfish battle theme, it's an orchestral affair that helps to sell a feeling of intensity and fighting for your life. It starts pretty solid, but partway through, this track turns into something that feels more at home in a JRPG boss fight, and I adore it. If nothing else, this music track is trying way harder than the boss itself. The only track I was tempted to say wasn't pulling its weight was Now That We're Men. And sure, it leans so hard in atmosphere that it lacks an identifiable melody, but upon re-listening to it again, it's memorable in the way that something like Ocarina of Time's Forest Temple track is memorable. uses so many unnerving oddball sounds that makes players think, what the hell am I listening to? And even when you identify instruments like the accordion or violin, they feel so deliberately drained in comparison to the rest of the soundtrack that it makes it feel even more creepy. So yeah, not a bad track in this whole list. If I had to complain about anything, it would be the repetition. While Battle did have less tracks, it also had less levels, and it didn't really feel like any track was being recycled, with the possible exception of Sand Mountain. This game, however, has one dedicated theme each for the sliding and driving stages, and I feel like more could have been done here. Don't be wrong, both these tracks are amazing and some of the best in the game, so it's not like I find it unbearable, but I kinda wish the tracks we get were only used for Sandwich Driving 101 and Googly Eyes. And all the other levels remix the existing composition with new instruments to help match the new location's tone. Perhaps a rock version for No Weenie Parking Anytime, or a country version for Rub-a-Dub-Dub. Maybe we could throw that on the movie game rehydrated wish list. Small gripes aside, it's another excellent OST, and it's comfortably my second favorite soundtrack in a Spongebob game. And with that, we finally get into the gameplay, and I really don't know where to start here. Considering how conjoined this game is to Battle, I feel like it would be redundant to run through the basics the same way I did with that game. So instead, for just this one time, I'm going to step away from the structure I analyzed the previous SpongeBob game's gameplay with, and I'm going to go through my talking points on a scale. I'll start with the positive changes and additions, move into mutual differences, and descend into what's worse about this game. So, let's slowly climb our way down this ladder. If you recall, some of my biggest gripes with Battle were the sponge ball, which felt awkward to control and was exclusively used to clear timed gates, and the bungee jumping, which was often just a press A to get a golden spatula mechanic, barring the tiki breaking and downtown sea needle. By contrast, the movie game keeps both these ideas but properly fleshes them out enough to make them actually fun. Bungee challenges in this game not only drop that toll booth nonsense from the last game, but they actually live up to the challenge part of their title. In these, you go from one bungee pit to another by breaking all the targets, all the while avoiding steam geysers or lasers. They actually require some semblance of skill and timing to get right, and I actually have fun doing these. A far cry from battles, which felt like a boring formality. As for the sponge ball, it's become relegated to the sponge ball challenge pad, which I prefer for this specific mechanic. While the controls of the ball itself haven't changed, it's still infinitely better than Battle because the actual SpongeBob courses are built with this control scheme in mind. The pathways are noticeably a lot wider and have no super sharp turns to speak of. In general, these play out like miniature obstacle courses where you have to get SpongeBob past everything from moving platforms to trapdoors to blowers. They're actually among the tougher missions in the game, but when I mess up with these, it almost always feels like it was my fault, since nearly every obstacle with me worked out just by stopping to observe patterns. Best of all, they aren't timed. You can take as much time as you need, and thank God for that. And hey, if you still don't like the sponge ball, these challenges are technically optional, so I can't see these as anything but a complete improvement over the sponge ball segments in the last game. In terms of control, I'm happy to say that we've gotten a few cool additions. The general movement feels exactly like Battle's, which I'm all for considering that game's controls were basically perfect. Most of the attacks also return and work just as well here. There are a few notable changes though. First of all, SpongeBob's attacks have new animations to step away from the bubbles in the last game, which is neat, I guess. More importantly, much like the movies, SpongeBob and Patrick share about the same amount of screen time, and as such, their movesets feel equally developed. SpongeBob lost his Stomp attack, which I didn't really miss since it was his least utilized attack from Battle, and it was probably done to help differentiate Patrick some more. Patrick, meanwhile, has adopted SpongeBob's Spin attack for this game, which I appreciate. While his belly bump got the job done, it didn't feel as reliable when you were swarmed with enemies since it can only hit things directly in front of you. His star spin, meanwhile, feels much more consistent, and I really couldn't imagine playing some of his more demanding combat set pieces from this game with the belly bump. He also gets this cartwheel move, which I'm a huge fan of, honestly. Oh yeah, and he can also use his tongue to swing off these suspended ice blocks, much like Sandy from Battle. It works, and adds a little extra seasoning to Patrick's levels, but admittedly, the potential for creative platforming is cut in half without the glide. I would already say I prefer the general control in this game over Battle's, but it's taken a few steps further with the brand new Macho system. Replacing the shiny objects are these manliness points, which act much more like experience points than currency. Like before, defeating enemies and busting up the various Plan Z crates loaded around these locations will get you plenty of barbells. Once you reach set cumulative totals, you'll be allowed to upgrade your health or attacks. And I'm not talking a simple power increase either. Stuff like adding explosive properties to the Bash and Sponge Bowl, or turning Patrick's throw move into a watermelon grenade launcher. The best upgrades, however, are the buff spin attacks. They hit harder, reach further, and most importantly, they can reflect enemy projectiles, an absolute godsend for the abundance of flingers, poppers, and merbs in the later levels. But yeah, I love this new system. The shiny objects were good, but they were required for a bit too much, leading to experienced players either having to grind at the end of the game or put in a cheat code. The manliness points serve a much more distinct purpose this time around instead of just funneling into the main collectible, and across my playthroughs, I consistently get the last upgrade point before the final boss. Good stuff. I already talked about how much I like the Spongebob challenge pads, but I'm also a big fan of the floating block challenges. These exist as straightforward tests of platforming skill and are pretty damn solid. The first one is simple enough, but the later ones properly mix up block types, travel speeds, patterns, and groupings, making for some of the most challenging platforming in any SpongeBob game, right up there with the tougher segments in Dutchman's Graveyard and SpongeBob's Dream. Unlike the SpongeBob missions, these do have time limits, meaning you can't make too many mistakes, but these actually offer a checkpoint or two to make sure you're not doing the same first chunk of the challenge over and over again. The later versions are among the hardest tokens to get in the game, and while they are tough, they remain pretty fair. These are probably my favorite new thing they added to the game. My thoughts on SpongeBob and Patrick's abilities already alluded to this, but the combat is still pretty great, and we have the Bucketheads to thank for that. While another obvious instance of reusing Battle's ideas, I do think these guys don't get enough credit. A lot of the more memorable Planktrons get a parallel in this game. Chompers are now Foggers, Hammers become Slammers, G-Lubs become Spinners. You will notice that the enemy roster is a little smaller this time around, but it's not necessarily a bad change. A lot of robot concepts were combined into certain enemies to make for some surprisingly tricky minions. For example, Poppers combine Arf's keep-away tactics with Tartar's spread shot aiming, while Mervs mix up Chuck's devilish rocket spam and sleepy time zoning. Enemies that were dropped altogether were small fries like Fodder and Bombot, which I don't really have a problem with, as it feels like this game just wanted to trim the fat of Battle's enemy roster and really zero in on the ways they could make the combat more challenging. And yeah, I think the combat is more challenging in a good way. Standard enemies like Foggers can take multiple hits even from your macho moves as the game goes along, and you often have to be a lot more careful of how you approach. If multiple Foggers are hanging out with a couple Flingers or Poppers, who should you prioritize? Should you take out the Foggers first since they will actively pursue you, but leave yourself open to get hit by a stray projectile in the process? Or maybe you should go for the Reflex and Bashes to get the harder enemies out of the way, but at the risk of getting ganged up on. This kind of on-the-fly decision-making comes up a lot more in the movie game compared to Battle, partially because of a larger number of ambushes, but also because your tactics will greatly differ based on which character you're playing as, what moves you unlocked, and if you favored upgrading your offense or defense. Sure, this is still pretty far away from quality spectacle fighters or hack and slashers, but for a platformer, the combat's awesome. Following up on the fighting, I might as well talk about the last challenge pad type, the combat arenas. These are incredibly simple to grasp. You control SpongeBob and have to successfully defeat 3 waves of enemies without dying. While you'd think this would be the best possible showcase for how gratifying the combat can be in this game, it doesn't quite live up to that. I would have liked to see weird enemy combos to keep things interesting, but instead we don't get any more than 3 Buckethead types per combat arena. No matter what, 90% of the enemies you will be fighting are just the basic Foggers. This could still be tough, considering you have to fight 30, 40, and then 50 foes in succession on a limited supply of health, but nope. The arena has 4 Krabby Patty pickups that infinitely respawn. As a result, every arena turns into a war of attrition, where you run in circles around the perimeter of the arena, letting Foggers chase you, karate spinning anyone that gets too close, bouncing back projectiles when you've got the opportunity, and healing off any damage you take along the way. This strategy single-handedly wins every arena with minimal effort, and that reflects very poorly on how challenging the fighting is in the main stages. They're still disposably enjoyable in a Dynasty Warriors kind of way. I can't say I don't get some goofy catharsis in carving through hordes of mindless minions as a beloved cartoon sponge, but they're still the least engaging of the challenge pad types. Oh, and the final one in Planktopolis pits you up against a single jellyfish. It's definitely a funny subversion, especially compared to the level it comes from, but part of me wishes Heavy Iron just went all out for an ultimate challenge. But I like this more than I dislike it, I guess. Replacing Patrick's Lost Socks from the last game are these green glowing treasure chests. These exist as the obscure hidden collectibles that require keen eye or experimentation to locate, and much like the Lost Socks, I enjoy tracking these loot lockers quite a bit. Though, much like the socks, there is at least one chest that just sucks to get. This time it's the one in Shell City Dead Ahead, where you have to hit multiple pieces of bread in the toasters amidst the junk piles of SpongeBob's Sonic Wave Guitar. The problem being that SpongeBob can only access a very small portion of the level, so you have to hit these using the ring challenges to elongate your flight time. And considering this is one of the worst missions in the whole game, doing increasingly longer portions of this mission just to make some shitty soggy sea toast isn't all that fun. The main difference being that instead of just turning around to trade these in for other, more important collectibles, These will unlock features in the extra section. This includes concept art, the clip show cutscenes, trailers for the movie itself, sound packs that have both existing and cut lines, toggleable cosmetic changes, and costumes. Now, I do like the extras menu on the whole, especially the toggles and costumes, but I still have my gripes. Obviously, why would anyone want to rewatch the storyboard scenes? Just switch these out with the ability to rewatch the in-game cutscenes, and this would automatically be better. Also, one of the very last extras you unlock is a magnetic pickup that draws in manliness points from further away. That's all nice and stuff, but considering this only works on dumbbells placed in levels proper, you get it way too late in the game for it to be useful. Still, the treasure chest gives me the same completionist kick as the socks, but gives me some extra goodies that I like combing through on top of that. As you remember, Battle's single greatest innovation was its warp feature, which in tandem with the detailed pause screen and teleportation boxes, made navigation and backtracking a near non-issue. All these amenities return for the semi-sequel, and they're still pretty great. There is one small oversight though. When warping to the challenge pad, you get taken to the challenge itself, and not the pad located in the level. So if you want to get to a place near one of these pads, you have to either beat the challenge all over again, or simply warp to another mission within the level and hoof it the rest of the way. Now, there's no clean solution to this. Making warps to these challenges take you to a place adjacent to the pad means that players intending to play the mission would have to wait through another loading screen, but a nice compromise would be to set up a pad within the challenge itself. That way, players who want to actually play the challenge are still prioritized, but anyone else who needs to pick up a nearby treasure chest or get back to where they left off in a play session still have a reliable option. That said, these occurrences are not terribly common, and otherwise, the fast travel remains incredibly convenient. Finally, we come to arguably the biggest new addition, the brand new driving and sliding levels. Now, I'm thankful to say that control-wise, both the sliding and the paddy wagon feel very good. The sliding in these stages feels a little slower and jumps noticeably higher than the sliding we're used to, but that was probably done because these sliding levels are much more hazardous with a greater focus on platforming, and if it optimizes the playstyle for the level design, that's fine by me. The paddy wagon, meanwhile, plays pretty well by everything in the kitchen sink platform or vehicle section standards, with the right amount of weight, nice speed, responsive turning, and the ability to stockpile nitro boost pickups to use whenever you want. The level design for these sections is also really good. While the sliding courses from Battle were just a simple get-to-the-end scenario, the movie game puts forth a lot more unique goals while also upping the challenge with more obstacles and jumps while avoiding the ridiculous shit that made Kelp Force Vine Slide so frustrating. Sandwich Driving 101 and Rock Slide still require you to get to the finish line, but everything else sees a proper mix-up. Rub-a-Dub-Dub doesn't rock the boat too hard since it's only the first sliding level, but it still requires you to hit targets in order to progress, and upon revisit, you can check some of the new paths created in the chaos for new shortcuts and extra goodies. No Winnie parking gives you the exit right away, but you'll need to lap around the track exploring different roads for 5 keys. On top of that, this level leans much harder on hazards to keep you from getting too comfy. Sunday Driving takes a 3-lap approach again, but this time while pursuing Goofy Goober throughout his wacky wonderland of an amusement park, where just a few mistakes will allow him to get far enough away for you to fail, meaning nitros are likely at their most important and valuable here. Googly Eyes uses the first slide level's break the target style, but instead of being a mostly linear path, it's a massive jungle of color-coded wires. And the penultimate stage, Drive with the Knucklehead McSpazatron, might just be my favorite level in the game, partially for the challenge, but also for how surprisingly brilliant it is. This stage has you driving through Planktopolis to get to the Krusty Krab 2, so the layout is just Sandwich Driving 101's in reverse, which I really like that detail. Beyond that, this is easily the hardest vehicle level, with plenty of timed roadblocks that will instantly fail you if you can't pass them in time. So at this point, you're probably wondering why I didn't bring these up way earlier if I seem to love these. And while I do love what I've talked about so far, these only account for a fourth of this gameplay style. You see, each vehicle section has 3 additional Goofy Goober tokens to win upon revisit, one for completing a time trial, one for finishing a ring challenge, and the last for being a much tougher, dare I say, macho time trial. As for the quality of these missions though, well, they vary immensely in terms of quality, to put it lightly. To be fair, the first time trial mission for each level is incredibly lenient, and you should have no problems beating this on your first try, helping that you can use new shortcuts and take the shortest possible laps as much as you want, so they're totally fine. Even most of the macho time challenges can be enjoyable. The time limit is much tighter, sure, but since these are the last mission, you've learned the ins and outs of each course by then, so they're challenging in a good, fun way. That said, there are 2 exceptions. Rockslide's timer is way too strict and takes a lot of trial and error thanks to the large amount of force in the road, and even then still requires some borderline crazy speedrunning tech just to barely make it. Knucklehead McSpazatron only offends because, unlike every other level, the timer doesn't stop you to cross the finish line, meaning you can fail in the precious seconds that it takes you to land in front of the Krusty Krab. I honestly don't know how this got past testing. Oops, sorry, that perfect run you did through the hardest driving level means nothing when the finish line can't do its one job right. Looks like it needs to be even more perfect. Yeah, screw that. While I'm at it, I don't really know why you can't earn these time trial tokens at the same time, or even while playing the main mission. If you're good enough at playing through the stage, you should be rewarded by having to replay the stage less times. It would be like if you couldn't earn a box gem in Crash Bandicoot until after you've already beaten the stage once before. It adds nothing to the experience beyond padding. However, that's all trivial shit in comparison to the ring missions, easily the worst part of the whole game. On paper, it's a fun challenge. You've got to ride through the course, making sure to pass through each ring along the way. That's worked well for plenty of other games, but this game's ring missions are the worst from anything I've ever played. Most games will show you the next ring you're meant to go through, but they'll also show you the next couple rings beyond that so you can prepare where to go next. This one commits the cardinal sin of only having one ring visible at a time. Now, on its own, that wouldn't be the worst thing ever, but you know what makes it doubly awful? The fact that rings often appear just a few feet in front of you, meaning you only have moments to adjust yourself. And if you miss a single ring, you fail and have to redo it from the start. This alone makes ring missions incredibly stressful, but then we get these bullshit gotcha moments and I go straight into being pissed off. I really hate to beat this into the ground, but Superman 64's ring portions are better designed than this. And I would rather squirt a jalapeno directly into my eye than play Superman 64. That is the level of failure these missions are on. Just add a few extra faded rings to help guide you and literally every problem with these missions would disappear. These just suck. And the only reason I'm not more angry is that, again, they're technically optional. But as we're about to see, that's not exactly true. So really, I'd say the vehicle sections are a decent addition overall. I consider the first mission of each to be among the highlights of the gameplay, but everything else falls in between just okay and the worst parts of the game. And before we get into any more big stuff, I want to talk about the bosses. Battle's bosses were far from the greatest ever made, but they were pretty solid, especially by 3D platformer standards. You'd think the movie game's bosses would be even harder than the last games in tradition with everything else, but surprisingly, they're overall much easier, and in my opinion, they're worse because of it. To be fair, the frogfish is a pretty good first boss, as it requires baiting out the frogfish to nearly run off the edge of the arena, and will occasionally jump away to fight you from afar with its tongue and spit. It's an overall more involved boss than King Jellyfish, though it should be noted that this fight is the 8th level out of 18, nearly halfway through the game, so it's kinda weird to have such a large chunk of the game go by and we're only now getting our first boss. I'll give the frogfish a pass, but oh my holy Hillenberg, what the fuck happened to Dennis? You remember Dennis, right? That intimidating hitman who was paid top dollar by Plankton to murder our heroes in cold blood? How do you think he would fight Patrick Star? Let's just have him lob toilets at him. Yeah, that's totally how I imagine this fight would go down. If the fight was actually fun, I could probably forgive the stupid concept, but it's just so boring. He doesn't get more aggressive, he doesn't change his strategy up, he just summons a couple spinners as the fight goes on, which is just about the laziest way to make a boss tougher. You'd hope he'd learn some lessons by the time we get to his rematch on Hasselhoff's back, but no, it's actually easier if you could believe it. Once again, he just resorts to spamming projectiles and summoning a few extra mooks when his health bar gets lower, but unlike the first fight, where the arena was small and the spinners could give you some trouble, here you can just stand on one of Hasselhoff's arms where the slammers won't chase you, and you can just effortlessly reflect Dennis's knives back at him. I'm not even joking when I say this is probably one of the worst bosses I've ever fought in any game, just for how little threat he poses this late in the game. The only reason I don't consider the bosses a complete failure is the final boss, but for the sake of structure, I'm going to save that for last. So, up to this point, we've covered a lot of advantages and a lot of neutral territory, but very little I would call significantly worse. However, it should be said that most of the stuff I've already covered are pretty small things that together only make up a decent chunk of the experience. And now we're left with one of the most important parts of a platformer, the level design. As mentioned before, the movie game trades in Battle's more open-ended levels for linear levels. Now, I wear my love for collectathons on my sleeve, but I don't think this is inherently a bad thing. Linear 3D platformers can work just as well, and I can name plenty I enjoy. The course clear 3D Mario games, Crash 1 through 4, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and Pac-Man World 2 all certainly qualify in my eyes. The reason these games have such good level design is that compared to a collectathon, they're much shorter, but conversely offer a greater number of levels. This allows the designers to get really creative, not just in terms of aesthetics, but they can constantly throw new gimmicks, enemies, and mechanics at you while also finding new ways of mixing up those existing elements. It's hard to describe, but let me put it this way. If you picked out any 3 levels from any one of these games, one at the start, one right in the middle, and one towards the end, I could break down how each is unique without having to bring out the painstakingly obvious, like, the final level is much harder than the first level, or this level takes place in a casino while this one takes place in a haunted castle. I bring all this up because constant variety is probably the most effective method for making a memorable, fun, linear platformer. Now, with all that said, how does the movie game fare? To answer that, we're going to run a test. I have a chart with some general criteria along with the platforming stages starting with I'm Ready Depression. I left out no cheese since it's merely a 5-minute tutorial that only has the 1 token to get, so it can hardly be judged alongside the others. I'm going to run through all this criteria and see which levels have these elements. At the very start of the level, you talk with Mindy, where she'll give you your primary objective along with your new move as long as you have enough tokens. You immediately hit a button requiring the move to progress, and right after, you encounter a new enemy type that has a weakness to that same move. Following that, it's a mixture of platforming and combat along a linear path where you'll get a Goofy Goober token for getting to the end. Besides that, you've got 5 other tokens you can pick up from completing missions found either along the main path or in an area that branches off. There will be 2 challenge pads. Patrick stages will have a Sonic Wave Guitar challenge, Spongebob stages will have a Bungee challenge. The stages tend to require backtracking once you've gotten Patrick's ability to throw, and the remainder of the tokens are unique missions. And let's just look at those results. Now let me ask again. Is the movie game good at keeping things fresh? I would argue no. Sure, on paper, things seem interesting, but this game's cookie-cutter approach becomes insanely obvious when you realize every platforming level from 3,000 miles onwards is essentially characterized by the moves you learn and how you interact with switches and enemies. Battle also had stages that focused on using a particular move, namely Goo Lagoon and the Murmulator, but every stage still felt like something substantially different. Downtown being an open sandbox, Sand Mountain's triple threat of slides, Kelp Forest's less than obvious progression, even smaller components like set pieces or gimmicks went a long way to make these levels stand apart from each other. Not only that, but those levels still had diversity in the mission department. While several of Battle's missions are the same on paper, in practice, they usually do enough to stand out from similar missions. The Lighthouse and Mr. Krabs' Dreams are both essentially combat arena challenges, but one has you descending with each completed wave, encountering extra enemy types as you move along to the point where it's incredibly hectic by the end, and the other has you surviving against constantly respawning robots where you can only cease the respawning by beating enough of them. That's all it took. And, okay, I know this is a small thing, but even the naming helps. Even if earning golden spatulas feels too similar, at least they all have fun names to give them a little identity. Unique mission names is hardly the movie game's biggest problem, but there's something about this that feels so clinical and makes the missions come off as even more samey than they already are. Now sure, collectathons almost always have a reoccurring objective across all levels. Banjo has Jinjos, Mario has red coins, DK64 has the blueprints, etc. And even Battle has the bungee jumping. I'm all good with consistent missions and 3D platformers, but the movie game just comes across as excessive. I guess I could bring up the unique tokens from this game that aren't just a broad label, but even those aren't exempt from doing the same thing repeatedly. Do you like bouncing on trampolines? Do you like doing it above water? How about lava? How about while I turn off the console? I'm not going to pretend they're all this way, because there are definitely some great challenges here. Up the Chocolate Creek is the way Patrick's throw move should have been implemented into backtracking. You open up a locked door using your throw and gain access to an incredibly fun and challenging platforming sequence with moving marshmallows and swooping razors. Disco Star is not only an actually visually interesting set piece, but it's also an enjoyable gauntlet using the Murmulator's disco floor gimmick. And Cirque du Malaise is the most fun I have of Patrick's swing ability as he goes through a short but sweet series of swings and tight jumps over goo. If more challenges were like this, I'd probably be okay with all this, but this kind of stuff is the exception and not the rule. And while I'm at it, I might as well talk about the Sonic Wave Guitar challenges. Here, we've taken those flawless ring missions from earlier, but instead, you're controlling a speedy projectile where instead of guessing where rings would appear along the linear course, you've got a factor where rings will spawn in open 3D space, meaning there's more sun-sharp turns and even more gotcha moments. At least the first two are mercifully quick, but the last one might just be the worst token in the whole game, so yeah, these suck real hard. That said, for all the problems in the main stages, I will say that Bubble Blowing, Baby Hunt, and Onward are still fairly enjoyable just because the sheer mechanical challenge alone makes these levels fun to conquer, and that does count for a lot, but I just think these stages could try to differentiate themselves a little harder. And with that, we come to the single worst element of the movie game. It's abysmal pacing. As you realize, the game ditches the hub world and open-ended structure of battle in favor of going from stage to stage, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you finish the level, race to the finish, or beat the boss, you get to move on. Congrats. But that's not how this game plays. This game also requires collecting Goofy Goober tokens in order to hit certain target amounts from Mindy so that you can learn the new moves. And right there, you can see the problem. These two different methods of progression just attack each other, and it only leads to you disliking certain elements of the game even more. If you enter a new level that teaches a new move and you don't have enough tokens to meet Mindy's demands, she'll tell you to piss off and unceremoniously shove you back into the pause screen. I mean, imagine playing Sonic Adventure 2, you're having a great time, you make it to Metal Harbor, you're about to collect the Lightspeed shoes, and then suddenly Tikal shows up, tells you to come back once you've collected 5 emblems, and boots you back to the level select. Two things would likely cross your mind. 1, that's really obnoxious. 2, wait, Tikal, didn't you go to Sonic Heaven in the last game? What? Not only are the requirements constant, but they're pretty damn steep too. Let's say you only grabbed as many tokens as you possibly could on your first visit to every level and never backtracked. You would be forced to go back for more on 3 separate occasions, and the final progression gate is not getting the final move and playing topless. Oh no, the following level, Mindy will only bring back the paddy wagon if you gather 50 tokens out of the possible 63 you can get at this point in the game. Okay, before I continue, I have to ask, what is the importance of collecting Goofy Goober tokens? Other collectathons at least attempt to justify why collecting random shit is important. Power stars are magical in nature and are used to open the doors of Peach's castle or power the spaceships in the Galaxy games. Pages are required to access and expand the Grand Tomes in Yooka-Laylee, and Capital B won't even give you the time of day till you've collected enough for him to potentially steal back. Timepieces power Hat Kid's ship, and even King K. Rool forces B. Locker over here to stonewall the Kongs until they've gathered enough golden bananas. Even in Mario's Sunshine, you can make the argument that while collecting shine sprites is technically pointless, collecting the required shines at least indicates that you've done a significant amount of cleanup and that life for the residents has mostly returned to normal. You could also make that same argument for Battle's golden spatulas. Sure, there's no in-universe explanation for why these are needed to open toll booths and enter the Chum Bucket lab, but by the time you've collected 75, you've definitely cleared a lot of the robot's chaos and have helped with a majority of the locals' problems. At that point, you feel like you've done a lot. Here, all the important plot stuff and Plankton propaganda sabotage is done exclusively in each level's first mission. But for some reason, that's not good enough for Mindy, and you need these counterfeit coins of a goddamn Dancing Peanuts ice cream parlor for her to teach you new moves and get back to Paddy Wagon. I'm sorry, but in a mission to retrieve an artifact in 6 days or else someone's gonna die, urgency should take priority over getting tokens. But yeah, in short, this game tries to have both stage-to-stage and collectathon style progression, and it fails at both. As a collectathon, the excessively standardized missions, the levels that blend into each other, really limits the amount of standout moments the game can have, and at that point it's falling entirely on the core gameplay to carry the experience, which is possible, but it's far from ideal. As a linear game, the fact that simply beating the stages isn't enough to move on kinda sinks it by default. If you don't care about jumping through all these hoops just to beat the game, I'm sorry to say you're out of luck. Now, I will admit this doesn't really bother me personally. As a completionist, I'm fine with doing everything just for the sake of getting the most out of it, but that doesn't change the fact that this game shouldn't have been designed like this. I'm assuming these was put in just because they thought the game would be too short otherwise, but would it really? Without side objectives, this game probably still would have been about 3 hours, which feels about right for a game like this. And I don't think anyone would complain if these tokens were still here, but existed solely as an optional collectible, meant for bragging rights and people wanting to get the most bang for their buck. And before anyone brings it up, yes, I'm aware that Mario 3D Land and 3D World are a thing. Both are critical darlings, and both are great games under Mario's cap. And both are games with linear stage-to-stage progression that also require you to collect stuff to move on. So why does it not bother me there while it does here? Easy. It's all about the collectibles. Both star coins and green stars are treated like secondary collectibles that a player is capable of grabbing in a few seconds just by looking around in the stages. Grabbing those little guys takes way less time than beating any of this game's missions, and that's not counting the multiple failed attempts that are practically guaranteed for some of this game's hardest challenges. Besides that, 3D Land benefits from its incredibly straightforward, bite-sized levels where most coins are easy to spot. Meanwhile, 3D World has the whole co-op crown system that gives players a reason to get as many points as possible, with the green stars giving massive boosts to your score, leading to players who will literally kill each other for them. It's a smart choice. It also helps that the absolute majority of these collectibles can be grabbed on your first run of a stage, with the only exception being the rare character-specific buttons in 3D World, so backtracking isn't even really required. Simply put, these games handle this idea well, while the movie game just falls down hard. With all that out of the way, we can finally talk about the final boss. As I alluded to it earlier, this is the saving grace for the otherwise meh bosses, and it's one of the best parts of the whole game. After a crash landing at the Krusty Krab, all the pieces have come together. Plankton is gloating over a supposed victory with Krabs just moments from execution, SpongeBob and Patrick barge in with the crown to foil his plan, and Plankton gives the smallest bit of credit to SpongeBob before casually pulling out his trump card. King Neptune under his control. The fleeting chance for a peaceful resolution is gone, and you're left to fend off the ocean's highest power, puppeteered by pure evil. The fight is very similar to Battle's main bosses, and it has 3 very clearly defined phases that substantially change how the fight plays out. Neptune will attempt to hit you with his magic, but successfully avoiding damage will force him to change tactics, opting to snipe you with lasers instead. All the while, you have to make your way around the Krusty Krab using the karate spin to literally turn the tables on Neptune. Once you flip them all around, you duck behind the frozen crabs to rebound one of the lasers off him, onto all the tables, and right back at the king, leaving him open to SpongeBob's killer solo. It's also a surprisingly challenging fight. The first phase just has Neptune using his trident like a flamethrower, which just feels like a slightly more aggressive prawn from the last game, but then the second phase has this insane energy beam grid that simultaneously spins and moves outward that requires quite a bit of precise, skillful jumping. But then we get the final phase, which amps it up even further. Not only is a solid amount of the ground now gone, but now a few flingers will be spawned to give you some extra hassle. To compensate, Neptune's new attack is a less demanding version of that previous grid, so this phase isn't so hard, so you will be able to overcome it in a few attempts. And then there's the kick-ass boss theme. Name a better way to score the ultimate conclusion of this show than a high-caliber rock song that after its infectious opening starts getting surprisingly intense. It's a contender for one of my favorite final boss themes, and yes, I love it even more than Battle's final boss theme. And then the final phase switches out that song for the Goofy Goober Rock song from the actual movie, which was a really good call. If the original boss theme fits the equal clash between SpongeBob and Plankton, then the Goofy Goober Rock song dropping in towards the end perfectly represents the shift in power, the triumphant victory lap for our little absorbent hero. If I had any problem with this fight, it's just that whenever Neptune fires the lasers, the game swaps to his first-person perspective. It's kinda awkward and makes it hard to tell where you need to go. I get the purpose, to know where Neptune is aiming, but I feel like this would have been easy to tell just from the normal camera perspective. This isn't really an issue in the first 2 phases, but the extra factors present in the final phase can make this unhelpful angle pretty annoying. I don't think it's ever gotten me killed, but it's still something I would have done differently. Other than that, this final boss is a fantastic way to end the game, and it really does manage to match SpongeBob in my eyes. Oh yeah, and just so I don't forget, the reward for 100% completion is a cutscene that mirrors the pictures of SpongeBob's promotion shown in the movie's credits. It's a cute little scene, but much like Battle, it shouldn't be your reason for completing the game. And that was the SpongeBob movie game, a game that still does a lot right in spite of its missteps. The soundtrack is fantastic, the visuals mostly stay in line with Battle's appealing look and bring forth some nice new touches, the story is effective enough and gets plenty of entertainment with the increased amount of in-game cutscenes, and most importantly, the gameplay is still really fun for the most part, and manages to be different enough from Battle to not feel redundant. But this game has issues, guys. Some are small, like the repetition of some music tracks, the less memorable, less colorful aesthetics, and the abundance of these cheap-looking storyboard sequences in place of actual cutscenes. But the main thing I came to realize is that as far as noteworthy gameplay changes go, they're about split in thirds. For every improvement or positive addition over Battle, there's something done on par with it, along with something it does worse. While that theoretically means that the movie game is on equal footing with Battle, the problem is that the cons involve things that are far more important to the overall experience than the pros. As much as I enjoy stuff like the manliness points or the superior usage of the Spongebob and bungee jumping, especially because they fix problems I had with Battle, they really aren't worth the bland level design, cookie cutter approach to challenges, and steep requirements for progression that go against its linear format. And that's before touching on this game's multitude of aggravating challenges that dwarf the worst spatulas from Battle several times over. This is a Banjo-Tooie type sequel, where the few flaws the original had been completely ironed out, which is great, but the new fundamental changes to how the game plays introduced a host of new problems that make it the overall weaker game. Though, to be fair, I'd much rather play the movie game over Tooie. But keep in mind, a lot of this talk of this game being a mixed bag only really applies when it's compared to Battle. Battle is like a 9 out of 10 in my eyes, so a game that's a tad weaker than it means it's still like a solid 7. And considering the strict deadline Heavy Iron was put under, the fact that it's still mostly a good time is impressive in its own right. And among all the Spongebob games, it's secured a spot in my top 5. And with that, this exhaustive look at the Spongebob movie game is finished. Join me next time where we'll look at Truth or Square, the third and final of the Heavy Iron trilogy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and liking the video. I'm happy to be back on YouTube, and hopefully I'm going to be more consistent from this point forward. If you stayed until the end, maybe comment about your thoughts on the movie game. I'm all for opening up discussion on the games I talk about. Anyway, this has been Baileography, and I wish you all my very best.